All right, it's noon, so we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Um, I'm Dr. Bain Wilson. I'm going to kind of host this webinar again this week. For those of you that have been kind of joining us regular, we appreciate it and hope these have been useful. If we have any new participants this week, we sure hope this will kind of help you out. You know, we tried to pick some timely topics as we kind of move into summer, and also kind of we know that everybody's attention is on the livestock markets these days. So hopefully this is something you'll find value, and we plan to keep offering these every 2 weeks. I guess we were kind of a 3-week interval here this last time, but I think we'll be more on a 2-week interval here going forward. Our next webinar will be on June 26th. So I think we'll go ahead and get started with today's program. Our first speaker is going to be Glenn Wheeler from VDACS, and he's going to provide a livestock market update. So Glenn, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks everybody for letting me be here. Like you said, I'm Glenn Wheeler. I'm a livestock specialist with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. I'll be talking a little bit about the market, most of the cattle markets, more what I deal with than others. And start out, give you a little idea on the local markets, which you're probably aware. We're seeing a downturn in numbers as summer gets here and the heat builds. People are making hay. The local farmers have gotten most of their calves. You know, the numbers are just kind of dropping each week. As we move into it, smaller calves have lost a little bit of value. The big cattle, never been real strong. So on the graded cattle for this week, the average on the steers is 148. On a 500 to 600 pound steer, they're averaging 148 with a high of $1.56. Kind of steady with last week. Best I could calculate, probably about 10 cents lower than it was this same time last year. Your 500 to 600 pound heifers are $1.2345 with a high of $1.28. And we've seen a few heifers a little higher than that, throughout the time. But for this week, that number is $1.28, and that's down about $3 from last week. On the bigger cattle, Rockingham had a good sale last night, a good sale to reference to especially. They had a load of 849 pound steers at $1.2725, a load of 921 pound steers at $1.1850, a load of 922 pound steers at $1.2250. The heifers, they had a load of 730s at $1.2375 and a load of 815s at $1.1650. If any boys that want to sell, we got 2 sales coming up in Southwest Virginia that I know of. Is Dublin will have their weaned vaccinated BQA sale on July the 8th. Abingdon will be having a weaned vaccinated BQA sale on July the 15th. Both of those good places to put some calves if you have some weaned vaccinated cattle and want to add some money to them. Or both groups sell throughout the year, as do others throughout the state. If you're not doing it now, you probably should look into weaning, vaccinating, or at least marking your cattle. Look at this as an option. Back to the market side, slaughter cows have stayed pretty steady the last few weeks. Breakers and boners running in the 60s. Some high yielding cows getting up into the 70s, mid 70s, 76 or 7. Your leans are running down in the 50s, maybe up against 60. And that's about even with the same week last year of 2019. I'm giving you those comparisons just so you can kind of see what corona maybe or whatever's affecting it. But slaughtered bulls this week were, in the 90s, with the high yieldings up in $1 to $1.10. Bulls are actually a little higher than they were this same week a year ago. So, the cows are even, the bulls are a little higher. As we move more to a national forum or platform, everybody I'm sure are familiar with the Corona Food Assistance Program. It's up and running pretty strong. The wait times, you wait longer apparently to get your name in the pot and your numbers filled out than you do to get your money. The checks are coming pretty fast, and I'm sure all of you know that, but if not, you need to really check into that assistance program with your Farm Service Agency. When you look at the cattle futures, feeder futures for August are $1.33. They're down $1, and that's, they're up and down a little, but that's kind of consistent since about May the 20th. Live cattle are at 96, they're $2 lower. They're pretty much maybe $2 lower than they were on May the 20th. They've been up and down a little more in between, but they're kind of, always settling in that same area for the last couple of weeks. Box beef, we're seeing box beef, slaughter's back to about 95% of normal capacity, killing over 600,000 a day. And, it's not doing away with the backlog, but it's definitely, keeping things more current. And you're seeing that in your box beef prices. They're at $236.92 for choice, $221.44 for select. So that's down $35 in the last 5 days on the box beef prices. And that's about all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Any, we can type in questions in the chat box and save those to the end, but I guess, do we have any questions for Glenn right quick? All right. Glenn, hope you can stay on at the end. I know we had a flurry of questions at the end, our last webinar, and a lot of them were related to the market. So I hope you can stay on there and maybe fill those once people get a chance to get them typed in or kind of think of them there. So thank you very much.
I'll be here.
All right. Just kind of a reminder here, this webinar and all of our previous webinars, they're going to be available on the Virginia Tech Beef Extension website. I've got that link at the bottom of the kind of this title slide here for those of you that are on Zoom on your computer. And it's also on the flyer, any other advertisements that we've sent out about this. So just kind of a housekeeping reminder there. All right, our next speaker is Dr. Vitor Mercadante, and I'm going to allow him to screen share here, and we're going to turn the floor over to him.
All right. Thank you, Bane. Can you guys confirm that you can see my my screen, please?
We've got you, Vitor.
Right.
Yeah, we see.
Great. So, all right. Hopefully, everyone is getting about done with their breeding season. If you're not done already, but you're getting ready to get your bulls out, and then we need to preg check. So it is pregnancy check time, and I wanted to discuss some possibilities, some opportunities that we have during this time to do pregnancy diagnosis, some of the different techniques we can use to do pregnancy diagnosis in cattle. So if you ever see me talk anywhere, I usually always have this light up because I think it's really important, right? Like we think about reproductive efficiency and reaching our goal as a cow-calf producer to really produce a calf from every cow every year. There's not the one thing that's going to fix all the problems or it's going to solve our problems and help us achieve reproductive efficiency, but it's really this sum of things that will help us get there, right? So there are things like management, right? We have a big influence on how our operation is profitable and is efficient. Nutrition and health, it's really important. Those cows are not healthy, they are not in good nutrition condition, they will not get pregnant. We all know that. There's also a lot of reproductive technologies that are available for us now to help us get cows pregnant and help our cows get pregnant, and to better manage our the reproductive efficiency of our operations And also it's really important to have a selection pressure for fertility, for reproductive efficiency, right? And even if we're doing all of this and we're not really putting a lot of selection pressure for selecting for those animals that get pregnant, we're really not going to achieve reproductive efficiency. And even more important, you know, we need to be selecting, but we need to really be cooling those open cows, right? So that we can achieve high reproductive efficiency. And we can really select for those cows and heifers that get pregnant within our management conditions. So cooling those open cows is really important. And how do we know if those cows are open or not? Really is really what we're going to talk about here today. So we need to pre-check those cows, right? So we had a great market update earlier from Glenn, and you know, I'm not an economist, but and I'm terrible at math, so I'm going to ask that you be patient with me here. But you know, just to put a scenario, why is it so important to do pregnancy diagnosis? You know, because a lot of people sometimes ask, well, I can just wait until they calve to see if the cow's got pregnant or not. And that's really not ideal, because you really lose a lot of opportunity of profits, right? You need an opportunity to realize some profits, and ended up losing money by wasting time of those animals that were not pregnant. So, you know, just to illustrate that, so if we imagine that it costs us around $600 to keep that cow from breeding to weaning, then if we get that calf and we wean that calf and we sell that calf, we can make around $800 of profit, let's say, in a good year. Not a profit, but of selling the sale price for that calf. So we can, you know, realize a profit around $200 or so, right? Just to make numbers round and help us do that math. So if we have that same cow that is costing us $600 to keep, but she's not pregnant, so we're not going to get a calf to wean, to sell at weaning, and we're not going to make those $800. And we're actually not losing only $200, but really losing the opportunity of profit of $800, right? So it costs us a lot of money to keep those open cows around, and they're not going to return the profit by giving us a calf. So you can wait until they calve to see if the cows are pregnant or not, but you really, if you want to focus on profitability, on efficiency, we need to know as soon as possible if those cows are pregnant, and then we can manage them differently, right? So this is some of the most updated data that we have from the USDA on the use of pregnancy diagnosis on beef cow calf operations in the United States. So here's, you know, percentage of operations they use pregnancy diagnosis divided by different herd size. So you have a small operations, you know, they have up to 50 or 49 cows. So about 21% of them will do pregnancy diagnosis on a yearly basis. Then we have the medium-sized operations between 50 and 199 head of cattle, and about half of them will use pregnancy diagnosis. And larger operations that have 200 or more, is really nice to see this data. Almost 100% of those larger operations are using pregnancy diagnosis. So if you take a look, the last time we had this data was in 2008, so 12 years ago. Overall, in the United States, about only 18% of all beef cow calf operations were using pregnancy diagnosis. And with this most recent data, you can really see that we had a big jump. So we're closer to 32% of all operations. So it's really nice to see, you know, that the beef cow calf producers are really taking more advantage and really understanding the power that pregnancy diagnosis has on selecting animals that will get pregnant, and also avoiding wasting resources on animals that are not pregnant and will not be able to return a profit because they're not going to be giving us a calf, right? So it's really nice updated data here that give us some hope that I think a lot of things that we're doing are working, and people are realizing the importance of using those reproductive technologies and using pregnancy diagnosis. But still, you know, 30% of all operations is not a lot. So there's still a lot of room to grow. And hopefully, if you're not pre-checking your cows, I'll convince you to do that today. So how can I do that? How can I preg check my cows? Most common way that we can do this is through rectal palpation, right? So you're going to need your veterinarian to come in, and he's going to rectal palpation, be able to diagnose that cow is either pregnant or not. It really is an immediate diagnosis. So as soon as that veterinarian is done with the exam, he can tell you with high accuracy if the animal is pregnant or not. It is a low cost exam. So it will vary a little bit between $3 to $5 per head. It will depend on your region and how many cows you're gonna have, and how far are you from the veterinarian and so far. But you know, it's really not a high cost if you think about it. You know, $3 to $5 a head, if it can really save you a lot of money from not keeping those open cows, right? It's your return on investment is quite high. Like I mentioned before, it really is highly accurate, a really highly accurate exam, but it will vary the accuracy depending on the experience of the veterinarian and the stage of pregnancy. So a very experienced veterinarian can detect pregnancy as early as 30 days through rectal palpation. But most veterinarians, including myself, I prefer doing that a little bit later, around 35, 40 days, 45 days ideally, because my accuracy and my speed even of how fast I can go and do those pregnancy diagnoses, it really improves quite a bit. But again, a lot of very experienced veterinarians can do this as early as 30 days. The second option that we have is really ultrasonography. And the development of these machines have really revolutionized the reproductive field on livestock. And as we progress and those machines become smaller, more portable and cheaper, a lot of veterinarians now have access to those machines and will do an ultrasonography instead of just a rectal palpation. The cost is marginally the same. People will not charge you more because they're using the ultrasound machine. And you know, it tends to be a little bit faster, a little bit easier on the arm of the veterinarian. So a lot of vets like using those machines. It does increase our accuracy because we can really see a heartbeat of that fetus, that calf really early on, and we can know for sure that the pregnancy is viable. We can do that as early as 26 days, which is really nice. We can gain some days there to detect pregnancy. But again, most veterinarians will do it between 30 to 45 days with really high accuracy. It does increase the detection of twins. So, you know, if this is something that is of concern, having the machine helps us determine if that cow is pregnant of twins or not with a little bit more ease than with just rectal palpation. And again, those machines nowadays are really developed and are really advanced and allows us to do some really accurate fetal measurements and aging if that's of interest for the producer, for your operation. And another really cool thing that we can do with the ultrasonography exam is fetal sexing, which can be of interest for especially purebred producers, right? So just to give you an idea, those 6 panels here is with different ages of pregnancy. So everything that you see that's more on the gray scale is going to be tissue. So that's the uterine horns inside the cow. And then everything that's black is fluid. So on this 26-day pregnancy, you have the uterine wall here. You can see the uterine fluid. And then that little bump right there is the 26-day pregnancy, 26-day conceptus, okay? And then at 28 days and then up to 35 days, and you can see how fast that fetus is really growing. And then as you go down to 40, our left panel here in the bottom, 45-day pregnancy, and you can start seeing the limbs develop in the back limbs. You can see that's the head and that's the full body of the fetus. And in a 60 and a 65 day with a lot more definition, now we can see all 4 limbs. You can see the umbilical cord and then the head, the neck of the calf right here. And then a 65 day, you know, tip of the nose, the head, the eye, and all 4 limbs they're showing. So it really improves the accuracy of the examination and allows us to do some really precise measurements if we need to do that. So I mentioned before fetal sexing, we can do this. There's a short time window, window of time that we have to do those exams, but between 55 and 65 days of pregnancy, we can come in and we can determine if it's a male or a female. And we do that based on the position of what we call the tuberculum, genital tuberculum. So if it's closer to the umbilical cord, and we can see here, it's going to form the scrotum. And if it's closer to the tail, it's going to form the vulva. So depending on the image, and it takes a lot more practice and a little bit more skill from the veterinarian, but we can determine if that fetus is a male or a female. And again, that could be going to be added cost for the exam because it takes a little bit longer, and it takes a machine that has a little bit more definition, but it can be done, and it can be done with high accuracy. So if you have an interest of knowing if that cow or heifer is pregnant with a bull calf or a heifer calf, we can do that. So really cool to be able to do this. Our last option for pregnancy diagnosis, and also getting more popular, some of the blood tests that will detect what we call the pregnancy-associated glycoproteins, which are also known as PAGs. And those are proteins that are produced by the placenta, okay? So if the cow is pregnant, it has a placenta there, you can detect those PAGs in the maternal blood circulation. And we can do that depending on the tests. There are a couple tests available. They're commercially available now, as early as 25 days in heifers and as early as 28 days in cows. It really has high accuracy and 99% precision to determine when the cow is open, okay? But you got to pay attention. You need to make sure that you're collecting that blood at least 60 to 90 days, depending on the test that you're using, post-calving. Otherwise, you can have some false positives. So it's really important to make sure that you are respecting this interval post-calving before you are trying to detect pregnancy diagnosis, the pregnancy on those cows or heifers, okay? Because they will definitely affect the accuracy. There is a shoot side test that's available now, but most tests were not shoot side, will not give you an immediate result, right? So after you submitted your sample to the lab, usually it takes between 1 to 2 weeks to receive your results back. So if you really need to know right away if your cow is pregnant or not, a blood test might not be the best way to go. But again, just recently, there's been one of the tests that's now available that can give you immediate results. The cost is very similar to pregnancy diagnosis by rectal palpation or ultrasonography. So depending on how many tests you're going to run and which lab you're going to use, it's going to vary between $250 to $5 a sample, right? But really important here to highlight this, but you need to collect blood, right? And it's not something that everybody knows how to do, but it's definitely not something that you cannot learn. It's fairly simple, and both companies have very good tutorials on how to collect blood. We usually do that from the tail, and you can also do from the neck, but a little bit easier usually on the tail. Have very good tutorials on how to label your samples and ship it, and how to pack them to be able to ship to the lab. So again, we have labs around in Virginia and around in the east here of the United States that will offer that that test, and it can be valuable, and it's a good resource to know and to use for sure in beef cow-calf operations. So we can use rectal palpation, ultrasonography. We can do some other blood tests. A lot of those same exams can be done with milk as well. But I guarantee you it's easier to collect blood from a beef cow than to collect milk. But those tests are available for milk as well, right? But I really want to highlight something. Whatever it is that you're doing, you need to make sure that you are preg checking your cows. And you need to be building that relationship with a veterinarian, right? Because one thing that the blood test will not give you is that opportunity to have the veterinarian come into your operation and not only just stick his hand in the cow and say open or pregnant, but really spend some time and ask questions and evaluate other things on your operation, right? Taking a look at your calves, taking a look at the overall state of your cows and how your pasture is doing, and then talk about vaccinations and talk other things too. So, I think it's important to highlight the opportunity that pregnancy diagnosis visit from the veterinarian is, right? To discuss other things and to build a relationship. So, but whatever it is that you want to do, please make sure that you are preg checking your cows, because it can really be a decisive technology to really say that if you're going to be more profitable or not, and you'll be selecting for animals that have high fertility or not. So that's all I had. Here's my contact information. If you have questions and if you can't answer now, you cannot ask them now or at the end of the webinar, feel free to reach out and we can help you understand some of those technologies and find someone that can help you get your cow's pregnancy diagnosed.
All right. Thank you, Vitor. We've got a couple questions, I guess, in the queue here. Maybe we can squeeze these in before Dr. Currin's talks, kind of while we're kind of on the topic of your presentation. So one question is, what would be the normal rate of embryo death between, say, about 30 to 45 days and then to 90 days?
Sure. So the majority of embryonic loss happens before day 20, okay? So we think that of all the losses, it's between 80 to 90% of the losses are gonna occur before we can even preg check, right? So you have fertilization, you have an embryo that's in the uterus, and then it's gonna die before day 20, okay? Between day 35 to 45, I believe that was the question, you really don't have a lot of losses unless you have a problem, unless there's a disease. But usually it's going to be no more than 5% after you preg check at day 35, for example. Then from then on, it's really even lower. So 1 to 3%, for example. So if you're having more than 10% losses between a pregnancy check at day 35 and then at day 65, there's probably something going on. But I would not expect anything more than 5%.
All right. Thank you, Vitor. I guess I've got one more question, and it might, it kind of deals with the application of preg checking and ultrasound technology with fetal sexing. But I'll just kind of read the question. It says, what is the possible added value of sex determination from ultrasound pregnancy checking to making culling decisions in lieu of the fact that steers are worth more than heifers?
Yeah, that's one of those good questions that you go like, yeah, it depends, right? But for example, in the dairy business, it's a no-brainer, right? Everybody needs the female. So depending on how things are, and it might be feasible to actually abort that pregnancy and start over, for example. I don't know, right? There's several economic scenarios that we can play around and make those decisions. In the beef side of things, I think the biggest added value, for example, if you're selling a purebred cow or purebred heifer that has a high genetic value, and you're selling that cow or heifer as a pregnant animal, and knowing if that offspring is going to be a bull or a heifer can be important for the person that's going to buy that animal and is going to use it as an embryo donor, for example, or has an interest in developing bulls that could be sires for semen sales, for example. So knowing that beforehand can help whoever is buying that animal to make plans and to adjust how they're perceiving to manage those animals and to market those animals. In a commercial standpoint, I think it's a little bit more difficult to use that that information. Most of the time, you're going to get a 50-50%, right? Like of males and females. We've seen here some years you get more males, more females, and it's a little bit more challenging to use that data, that information in a more commercial setting. But if you have an interest on you need more heifers, for example, and you want to increase your herd, knowing ahead of time, if you really are going to have a 50% female calf crop, or maybe less, it might help you plan to buy some replacement heifers in the future. So it really depends, but there are scenarios that would make sense to use the technology, and there are scenarios that would definitely not make sense to pay that extra money. And that's another thing. So it depends on how much your veterinarian is going to charge you to give you that information, right? And to be honest, I'm not sure, and maybe Dr. Currin will know this answer, but I'm not sure how much more a veterinarian will charge to do the fetal sexing. But I'm sure there's an added value. So,
All right. Well, I've got one more follow-up question, and then we'll get to Dr. Currin's presentation. I think it kind of follows up to our first question there. It says, when does the embryo die that is determined a dead fetus by ultrasound around day 80 to 90?
Well, so if you did it depends. So if you at day 30, you did a ultrasound and that pregnancy was viable, and day 90, for example, you do it again, we really don't know, right? But the majority of losses will occur earlier than later. That makes any sense.
Okay.
That answers the question.
All right. Well, thank you, Vitor. Hope you can stick around to the end, and I'm sure we'll have possibly some more questions at the end. And now I think we'll transition and have Dr. Currin come on here, and he's going to talk about summer fly control strategies. Dr. Currin, or can you unmute?
Okay, let's try again. So, Taylor, you were talking about that this is summation of our preg check stuff, but we didn't get in quite as early as you wanted to know about in these animals. But between most of these preg checks occurred between 45 and 60 days. There was one out here at 75. And then we preg checked those cows again between 100 and 120 days. And you can see that we lost 1% to 2% of the animals during that time frame. So that's kind of what we hit there and kind of where we're at from that standpoint. Now, from that time frame on, we lost about another 1% to 2% of cows that didn't calve as well. So the downside is the earlier you preg check, you can age them more correctly, like Dr. Vitor said, and stage the pregnancy. The downside to that is you will have just a little more pregnancy loss the earlier you go. So it's a trade-off as to which one of those you do win. So I'm going to do fly control. I'm going to look at that and talk about fly control from kind of 1,000 feet up, and then answer any questions anybody has, and try to go from there. Fly control is a difficult topic. And the first question I think we've got to ask is, when I talk to producers, what do you consider good fly control? Does that mean control of horn flies? Does that mean control of face flies? Or does that mean you got no pink eye? And to be honest, a lot of the time people judge their fly control program by whether or not they have pink eye. And pink eye is a terrible mess. It's a disease that frustrates all of us. And it's understandable that that's the way we tend to judge it. The second most common way I see people judge it is by the control of face flies, and that relates back to their concern about pink eye. And certainly if you get an animal and then Glennie has to reject it at the special graded sale or one of the VQA sales because it has too big a scar for pink eye, that's a pretty huge economic loss. Personally, I had a calf back in 2014 that failed to be graded and didn't go into graded sale on Tuesday at Withfield. This is a Holstein calf. Went in the regular sale on Thursday, and obviously cattle price really high then, but it was $500 loss on that one calf of what it would have brought in its pen. It would have gone in on Tuesday. So obviously there's some pretty good losses in individual animals, but in reality, the biggest loss economically is in horn flies. And too often we kind of don't pay a lot of attention to horn flies unless we're getting the cattle up and there's a lot of flies on them and they're buzzing around us and that sort of thing. But it is important for us to talk about them, and the horn fly and the face fly are really the enemies that we're worried about. The horn flies being the little flies that are on the back lined up like dive bombers and floating around. The face flies causing some irritation amongst the cattle to gather up and stand close together and that sort of thing. And then of course the pink eye we talked about, stable fly and all these other flies and that sort of thing. They're just minor nuisances. They're not the big thing. Heel flies, excuse me, that cause warbles. We've practically eradicated them. The widespread use of macrocyclic lactones, ivermectin, and the similar drugs have essentially eradicated warbles or grubs from cattle. I got a call from a producer the other day saying that he saw some cattle running with their tails cocked and getting into the pond. It'll be interesting to see if he has any warbles later this fall. I haven't been able to find a warble in at least 8 to 10 years to show a student what a warble is in the fall of the year. So, for all essential purposes, we've kind of eliminated those. For horn flies, the number that we've used forever for control needed is kind of this 200, which means kind of 100 per side. Just as a frame of reference, when they're really crowded on the animal, when you take a picture and blow that picture up, when they're crammed on like that lower right-hand animal, we can find 200. We can find 100 animals underneath the size area that my hand, palm, and fingers extended will fit. They can cram in there pretty good, and there are a lot of flies on that lower right-hand cow. And that's when it's considered to be economically important to control them. Now, let's move away from the enemy and look at what the drugs we have available to control flies are. So we've got the pyrethrins, and they come in different formulations. The porons, those go back to your original permethrin product that's out there. There are a dozen or 20 different brand names of permethrin out there. That's the original compound in this class. And D-lice would be one of the most common ones that's out there, but there are lots of other ones that are out there. You can get those that are concentrates to be mixed up in sprays, and you can spray on the cattle. Fly tags, there are probably the most common compound is one of the pyrethrin or pyrethroid products that you can get in fly tags. And then concentrates to go into back rubbers and that sort of thing are all the different ways you can get the pyrethrins. The organophosphates, when EPA changed their rules, I don't know, probably certainly at least 15 years ago, as far as how organophosphates were regulated, we lost the Poron products that are out there at the time, Warbex and Spot On being the two products that those of you with gray hair like me can remember giving to cattle and that sort of thing. But we still have organophosphates in the fly tags, and you can still get concentrates to go into back rubbers and everything as well that contain organophosphates. The easiest way to tell whether a compound is an organophosphate or a pyrethroid is to look for phos somewhere in the long chemical name. Essentially, almost every organophosphate compound somewhere in that 20 letter and number name that it has will have PHOS, will have phos in it at some point. And that'll pretty well, except for Corral, that'll pretty well get you true as far as the chemical name goes. And then we have the macrocyclic lactones. And obviously, those are your Poron dewormers, your ivermectin, your Dectomax, your Cydectin, your, I'm leaving one of them out, Eprinex, Porons. They do have some activity against flies as well. And we have a couple of different tags that contain avermectin, which is a macrocyclic lactone and avermectin type compound as well, XPA20, and then lost the name of it, try something, fly control tag that contain macrocyclic lactones. And so it's important when you consider treating animals, and we're going to talk about resistance and that sort of thing in a little bit, but understanding if you've decided that you need to switch drugs, switching from, say, Saber to Silence is not going to buy you anything or do anything for you as far as resistance to the compounds, because those are both pyrethroids, later generation pyrethroids that have the exact same activity, and we're not going to see any additional benefit from that. By the same token, your avermectin type compounds, your macrocyclic lactones are going to be the same way. Down there at the bottom, I've included this other avenue, and that's the insect growth regulator, the larvicides, the feed-through type compounds that also play a role in this, and that work through a different mechanism. And so when we were talking about a resistance impact, we're talking about things that would work differently. Okay, so if we go then and talk about the control options for flies, none of this stuff's really changed very much recently. We haven't really gotten any new compounds. The enemy hasn't changed. He's gotten a little smarter. We had a tag that Bayer was going to come out with about 3 or 4 years ago. That was a completely new class. There were some issues with the first fly tags that came out, and they keep saying they're going to reintroduce that tag, but it hasn't come back on the market, and it was going to be nice to have a different type compound. But we're still left with our insect ear tags, and the original ones came out in the 70s. They were permethrin in those ear tags. The first year they weren't great. If you remember, they came in these big buckets, and you could get them in these buckets and pop the lid off. I still have one of the buckets I've saved that my dad had saved, and I've kind of kept from those ear tags. First year they were world beaters. The second year they were good, and by the third year they were approaching fly swatter type activity, and not quite so much good from that standpoint. We have different compounds that go in them now, but we still have a lot of different activity. I'm going out to a guy's place as soon as I get done here. 2 years ago, he used the avermectin type ear tag and thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Last year, he went with that same fly tag again and decided that was a good thing to do. And he was happy, but less happy than he had been in the past. And then this year, he's like, I don't know if I want to spend that money or not. And we'll get to that when we talk about resistance, but that's an important thing to look at. You know, back rubbers and dust bags, been around forever. Mixed diesel fuel with most, or mineral oil with most of these compounds is what the recommendation is. And so we utilize those. And those are nice because they're minimal effort. The pour-ons and the sprays, you know, whether we're talking about actually having to individually get those cattle up and work those cattle and run them down a chute and pour them, or whether we're talking about something, a concentrate we put in a backpack sprayer and spray those. Some of the most effective programs that I've seen people do involve that in conjunction with rotational grazing. So as you rotationally graze those cattle, you sit there and spray those cattle as they go through the gap in the wire, and you do that every week or two and get along pretty well. Our oral larvicides or insect growth regulators, they do a really good job for what they're supposed to do. So they do a good job, particularly against horn flies that are 100% laying their eggs into manure, of stopping those from developing, and they're pretty effective. Now, the two limitations of them are the animals consuming this regularly like they're supposed to. We know there's some issues with mineral consumption. Also, if you're using one of these products, you need to be sure that that's the only mineral source they have. Because if you have another mineral source out there for them, then the cattle aren't smart enough to say, I need to go eat this one. So we don't have that, but they work very well. The downside to them are kind of twofold. One, if you let a big adult fly population get built up first, you know, you've got to work through all those adults and their development. And so it's pretty slow appearing benefit here. If your neighbor's not using it, then the adult cattle keep coming over and reinfecting your cattle. So if you're very isolated, or if you convince everybody around you to use it as well, then it can be a very important, good player in a program. But by itself, you're unlikely, if your sole deal is visual appraisal, you're unlikely, if that's the only thing you do for fly control, to really think you're accomplishing a lot. Face wipes at mineral feeders, you know, they're kind of like the back rubbers and dust bags, but they're more for face flies, and we're trying to get them there. You know, the one that I kind of underappreciated originally is the vet gun. You know, we've kind of went through these things. You know, we've got the fly tags that are the most effort, pour on kind of second most, and then these other things that are kind of minimal effort. Now we've got the entertaining one. And I certainly underestimated the desire of farmers to shoot things and their enjoyment of shooting things. And so, you know, I don't know what frustrations they're taking out or that sort of thing. But these do seem to be something that farmers like and enjoy doing, and can be a way to apply it and get your entertainment in otherwise. So it's something to, you know, that is something that's important. And it's a whole lot more fun to sit there and shoot things from the truck with the air conditioner running than it is running cattle down the chute when it's 90 degrees. Now we get to the big bugaboo, and that's resistance, okay? And we have terrible resistance from horn flies. There's no doubt about that. They started developing resistance, you know, within a year or two of the introduction of these compounds and their routine use for fly control. And so we have places where, you know, a week or so for a pour on that we were running cattle down and shoot, we only may get a week to 2 weeks out of that product, where we would have expected when we first introduced that product, we were getting 3, maybe even 4 weeks of fly control out of those products. And so, you know, to get cattle up, run them down a chute, spend 50 to 75 cents for a product, plus our labor to get a week or two, we're really not feel like we're accomplishing much a lot of times. So what do we do? And I've kind of listed all the different possibilities out there, you know, and the different things people have done. Let's rotate drug classes every time. So if we're using an organophosphate in our back rubber this time, we'll make sure we use a pyrethrin when we charge it the next time. You know, what we traditionally had recommended is rotate drug classes annually. Okay. And so, you know, that's where you'll see a lot of the stuff that's written that says fly tags, use this fly tag this year, and use these fly tags the next year. You know, if you look in, you know, PBS, Animal Health, or Valley Vet or whatever, oftentimes they'll have a little guide, or somebody, a drug company such as Bayer, who makes a lot of fly tags and products, will, if you use this color this year, use these colors this year, and that sort of thing. And so, you know, and that's kind of what people have done a lot. Do you use the same drug class for everything? So do we make sure that this year, if we're using a fly tag and something in the back rubber, you know, do we use the same drug class for everything? Or do we use multiple drug classes at the same time? You know, so we're taking a multi-pronged approach to that. And so, you know, what we are looking at here, you know, we have that opportunity. We have multiple fly tags. We have a fly tag that has both organophosphate and pyrethrin in it. We have a fly tag that has a pyrethroid and an avermectin in it as well. That one also has piperonyl butoxide, a synergist, to make the pyrethroid work better in it and increase its activity. You know, so those are kind of some of the things we look at there. So, or do we look at this multiple avenues to attack flies? And I'm going to kind of sum it up here. You've got to have a multi-layered approach. And what you do this year is not necessarily what you need to be doing next year. And is certainly sometime in the next 2 to 5 years going to need an adjustment. And so we may need to do things. You know, we'll do things like, okay, we've got a group of stocker calves and we're going to midsummer deworm those stocker calves or give them their second application of dewormer associated with a strategic deworming program for them. Well, we're going to use a pour-on, say, Cydectin and knock down the flies. We know that's probably only going to last for 2 weeks at best, but it's going to help us get rid of the ones that are resistant to the pyrethroid. And so if we come back and spray them as we move through a rotational grazing system or whatever, we'll get those flies that have resistance to that, will help the other thing work. You know, and so, you know, you need to be constantly thinking. You probably need at least 2 of these options to get really good, what I would consider really good, satisfactory fly control. And they need to probably not be the same 2 all the time. Every year, year in and year out, we need to be adjusting and adapting, because that fly is adjusting and adapting and is really good at that. And so you need to work with, as Dr. Vitor said, you need to work with your veterinarian. You need to do that in a way to come up with an integrated pest management plan to be successful at this. And we need to be adapting and changing that plan. And sometimes that can mean, okay, we haven't used fly tags for 3 or 4 years. Well, then we'll go back to fly tags at a place where they've fallen out of favor, and we'll have good results because now we're dealing with a different population of flies and that sort of thing. And now we'll have some good results and we'll go on that for a couple of years, but then we'll need to be nimble and back off of that plan and go to something else in the next few years. So that, like I said, that's kind of the large, big picture deals. I'll stop there and take any questions, and I'm sure Dr. Vitor and Glennie will be happy to take questions as well, and we'll answer anything more specific that people might have.
Dr. Currin, we've already got a couple questions for you. So I got some questions. What happened to Elector or Spinosyd?
Okay, so Elector or Spinosyd was a new class of compounds that was out there, and it was launched by Elanco several years ago, and you could get it in concentrate for a spray, or you could get it in a pour-on for animals, and it was really nice that it was a completely different compound. They priced, in my opinion, they priced that product really, really high. It had a lice and a fly label on it. It came in at exceeding $1 a head for the individual animal treatment deal. They never sold very much of that product. And so the only way you can get that product currently is in a premise spray. And so that product does still exist, but not so as that we would use it typically in a beef cattle setting. You know, a dairy person spraying around calf hutches and that sort of thing would be a possibility. That product was kind of voluntary pulled from the market by the companies just simply because, which is a real shame because it was nice to have a completely different class of compounds. It was also, if you looked at the EPA warnings on that product, it was the safest product that was out there that we would consider a chemical. But that's what kind of happened with that product. Like I said, I'm editorializing my comments about the pricing of that product a little bit, but I think that's a little bit what doomed that product.
All right. Other question was, what was the active ingredient and kind of that Bayer tag you mentioned?
Tofen Pro was the name of the tag itself. Oh dear. It's almost the same as that. If you'll give me just 1 second, I'll have to look that up since it didn't come out, or it came out for about a month before it was pulled. I don't have that one off the top of my head, but if you'll give me just 1 minute, I think I can get that for you, maybe.
All right.
Well, is there anything else? Any questions for anybody else or anything while I
don't see any in the chat, but I guess if anybody has any, they can, as we're done with speakers, they can maybe unmute and go ahead and ask them.
See, I might have had that in this slide set. Let me look here. I'm looking. Oh, of course it doesn't. I didn't spell it right for one thing.
Well, I got Dr. Currin on the spot. Yeah, feel free to ask any other questions.
Tolfenpyrad, for whatever that's worth. TOLFENPRPYRAD.
And that would be another one that would have been unrelated to a lot of our other.
It would have been completely unrelated, but it was supposed to be back on the market. We're at the 3rd year now of supposed to been back on the market. And so I've kind of given up on that one.
Well, it probably because it's in the neonic class is the reason they hadn't pushed it, Dr. Currin. If I can catch this spelling, it's a neonic that's used as I think it's used as a seed treatment and some other stuff. So it's in the Maya class of products.
Well, they had some irritation in the eyes after the fly tags were irritated in about 10% of the herds that they were put on. The company's story at the time was that they did, that it was due to the excessive amount of powder, and there was a lot of powder. We had about 4,000 of those tags in here when they got recalled. And so I don't know. But like I said, that, you very well may be right, but it's a shame that we don't have a new type compound, but we don't at the moment. And Elanco owns Bayer now, I guess, so we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, I don't think anybody has anything else, so I guess we can wrap up here at 1. Really appreciate you all joining. We will get this recording kind of added to our library there on the Beef Extension website. And hope everybody has a great weekend and stay safe out there.